My name's Chris. I'm part of the organizing team with WHO. So before we jump into the next panel, we've got 2 panel sessions coming up for track 2, introducing foundational DPIs and then health DPIs. But before that, we just wanted to share with you, this is the app we're going to use throughout the 3 days for kind of interactive polling and Q&A. Brilliant. So you've all immediately got your phones out. So yes, if you go to the link or the QR code. Okay, so just to get started, we'll take a quick pulse check. So based on what you've heard so far this morning, which is sort of set up and teed up nicely the next 3 days, could you rank? It should be showing on your phone, even though it's not on there. So there's a score of 1 to 10. It's either help, I'm in the wrong meeting, to I'm super energized and I can't wait to get started. So while we do that, I just explain. So this is just, of course, a quick fun poll. This app will be running in the background all the time during the sessions. So you'll see there's another slide where it's always open to take questions. So during the panels, I think we'll leave it to the moderators, but we'll be leaving as much time as possible at the end. So of course, please put your hand up. We want to encourage people to interact humanly as well, but feel free to also be writing questions if you prefer in the background. Colleagues, you can also be upvoting questions so we see which are most popular. Try and read them, and if there's don't repeat questions if you can't, just give a thumbs up to the one that's aligned with what you're thinking. And we can also try and curate those, and at the end of each session, feed them back to the panel. Okay, so we'll let you know the pulse check scores later. And I think if Chinny, if we just move it on to the Q&A slide, so it will be ready to take your questions. And with that, then I'll invite Hanny to come back up to the stage, who's moderating the first panel on foundational DPIs.
Okay, good morning again. Sorry, it seems that you are going to get an additional dose of me in moderating this session, but we're gonna deep dive a little bit on the concept of DPI, the foundational DPI. The concept of DPI, as I said, is not new. I mean, all the countries who managed to have good implementation of digital government, they've been applying this without calling it DPI, right? Like Estonia, India, Singapore, Kazakhstan, Moldova. We have a lot of countries who have exactly more or less the same concept, right? What made DPI very famous is only 2 years ago in the G20, where India really created a tsunami after the G20. And thanks to India, by the way, because you raised the attention to how you scale digital services in the government space. So we're gonna deep dive a little bit in the DPI, and I would like to, in that sense, invite my dear speakers. Okay, so I would like to invite my distinguished speakers to the podium, please. Ms. Anusri from CDPI, Center of DPI in India. Anusri, please. Professor Satya from DPI Academy. Please join us on the podium. And Dr. Ram Kumar from GovStack. Very good. I noticed, but it was not intended at all, that the 3 are from the same country. So it's pure coincidence, okay? Good. So before we deep dive into the topic, I would like to give a very short, inspirational 2 slides on, just to complement my intervention in the morning. But at the end of this session, normally you should be able to really understand what is this foundational DPI, what are its key components, what is the rationale, why there is a huge interest on DPI outside of the digital health space, but how also some of this could be borrowed into the health space and different sectors, by the way. And what are the resources available? The good news is there has been a lot of resources and reference architectures that has been built already for DPI outside of the health sector. So there is no need to reinvent the wheel, and we would like to make sure that you understand those kind of resources. Let me try to just tell the story again in a slightly different manner, but just to explain the mindset shift that we are talking about. Traditionally, as we mentioned, currently what happens is that when we build a solution, we build it almost like a full house. So you build the whole floors from the foundation till the whole stores. You build a full stack almost. So what is the problem of that? It's huge problem, huge problem. Why? Because of simply the cost. You are going to build large systems that cost a lot of money. And by the way, I was telling to one of my colleagues, when a donor comes to countries and put a lot of money, millions and millions, you know what it drives? It drives to this kind of situation because you tend to buy expensive systems, right? Because you think, oh, I'm going to solve all my problems. I have a lot of money. I'm going to build systems. I'm going to buy large systems. But this is a big problem because those systems are built as one big house. So the next house, you need to build another house and another house. And you cannot reuse some of the foundations or some of the doors or some of the pipelines that you have put for the houses. So it's not a trivial problem at all. It's just not sustainable. The DPI concept is a complete mindset shift. Is to say, no, 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 please don't build those big houses. Build bricks first. Build bricks, and then use those bricks to build the same three applications that you wanted to build initially. But build them using bricks. So those bricks, what we call building blocks. And as I mentioned in the morning, some of the building blocks have the duty of enabling trust, like digital ID, like signature, etc. Some of the building blocks needs to enable interoperability, like, for example, information exchange, like digital wallets, because you can exchange your data and give it to the user, and then the user will share it with whoever. Consent, which is another trust service. But very also important, and people might forget this, cloud. Because what's building blocks? Building blocks is microservices. Because all those components will be available on microservice. Now, everyone should build microservices. And when you say microservice, you mean cloud. I can tell you, in most African countries, the cloud capability is not there. And just 2 days ago, I was in a 5-star data center, and there is only people who have very minimal understanding of cloud. So they have a solution, and they are not even able to put the virtual machine on to run the application. So this is another building block. So don't repeat, don't duplicate, just build them once and use them to assemble them to use those building house. But the beauty is that you can build the house number 4 and house number 5 with a big difference. Those 5 new houses that were built are thin houses, cost less money, and are much more easy to implement and maintained by local capabilities. Don't give them the big houses because simply they cannot be maintained. So this is the approach that we in GovStack adopted, for example, at ITU. So what we did, we kind of explained how you move from the left to the right. This is a significant mind shift, significant mind shift. So this is the way of doing things business now. You need to move to shared infrastructure. And then if you build those bricks in a standardized manner and you hard code everything inside those building blocks, then everyone who's using this building block is adopting those best practices without doing anything. So you are enforcing everything in those building blocks from data protection. All those building blocks needs to be designed with data protection in mind, with interoperability in mind. The beauty of things that you can assemble them and build endless number of services and applications very quickly. If you are still in the left side, every time you would like to build a new application, you need to build it from scratch. It takes more time, more money, and then you are hooked with whoever is built this application forever, and you will pay license, continue to pay license forever. This is the situation today. This is simply unsustainable. And unfortunately, and let me very honest, many of the open source are still in this left thing. We need to be honest with ourselves. We need to say, no, even if you are open source, it doesn't mean that you are component-based. We need to shape the market to let even the open source decompose and move to the building block approach. So what we have done and maybe this is what we need to do for the health. Each building block, we need to explain the specification, almost develop a template specification for procurement. If you want to build this building block, take the specification, put it in the market, and get the best provider to do it. Interoperability. We need to, in the Lego bricks, there are those small tips so that they can fit together. This is FHIR. So here you put the open APIs based on FHIR that would make those bricks fit together. So in our specification in GovStack, we have defined open APIs. In the health building blocks, we will integrate, you need to integrate FHIR into the specification. So when a country wants to build this, they just take with open APIs, it's already standard-based. If I am using these building blocks, it's already FHIR enabled. It's already FHIR compliant. I don't need to think, how should I make it FHIR compliant? Then I need to build the architecture, how all those things fit together, and I need to do a reference implementation. Reference implementation to show it to a country. If we don't show it to a country, it will be very difficult for countries to do it because there is still a risk that it is be influenced by your small scope use case or driven by a specific donor agent. Okay, so the same, we can display it like that, moving from left to right with this horizontal layer. This is a very famous slide, by the way, which was done by Dr. David Eves. I'm using it because it's very nice. It's the same, but it's just visual. You do your horizontal layer and then put your vertical layers, and this is what we call DPI. So this is just the mind shift that you need to do. Now I'm going to move to our first speaker who will really take us in a much more, let's say, structured way of describing the DPI. So Anusri, maybe you have the floor. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anusri, and I represent the Center for DPI. At the Center for DPI, we are a pro bono tech architecture advisory institute that provides countries help with architecting their DPI, both foundational and health specific. Over the past 2 years, we've been working with countries in Africa, Asia, and the LAC region to sort of really help them get to the correct architecture, because at the end, what really matters is, have you architected your DPI correctly? Have you put in place the right governance, the right market adoption strategies to really get it the adoption that it deserves? So that's sort of our forte. And today, in the next 10 minutes, 15 minutes, what we're going to do is we're going to understand and maybe raise all our understanding to a shared level of DPI, and also see how it's used in some use cases with a focus on foundational DPI. So as Hani said, and as a lot of our previous speakers kept emphasizing, digital public infrastructure is just shared rails. So in physical world, we used to have these rails, roads, connectivity, cellular towers, all that, and that used to catalyze development and economic growth. And in digital economy, you need digital public infrastructure to do it. And digital public infrastructure with open standards and open specifications really drive public and private innovation. If you look at any digital economy, there are many repetitive tasks that every institution, every workflow, every business who is trying to do something has to undertake. This could be something like verifying an individual, or making a payment, or establishing trust in some entity or in some digital system, or transacting for the purchase of any goods or service, or even being empowered to share your data for access to a service. So digital public infrastructure is, again, just a general purpose technology block that provides you a means to do all these repetitive functions. It's just a block that does one thing, and it does it very well, like Hani's example of microservices. Moving on, this is a definition of digital public infrastructure, and because this is an evolving term, many organizations have their own definitions. We don't need to get caught up in the languages, but I would want you to focus on the highlighted terms, which is technology building block, the first term. So it's a technology building block. It is, however, not just a technology building block. It takes into account open, transparent, and participatory governance for driving innovation, inclusion, and competition at scale. So let's maybe dig a little deeper into that. One thing I want everyone to take away from today's session is DPI is not just about technology. A part of it is the technology building block. That's the general purpose block that we just talked about that does one thing, like maybe verifying an individual or making payments and so on. But it's not only about the technology. There are three equally important components that make a DPI as powerful as it is for digital transformation and drives all those exponential outcomes, enables countries to leapfrog years of progress and so on. So first is, of course, the technology, which is powered by open tech standards and protocols that enable systems to talk to each other. Second is open, transparent, and participatory governance. This could be putting in place legal and institutional frameworks. This could be public programs to drive adoption. This could be ecosystem facilitation, like activating market for uptake of that DPI. This could be also putting in place consumer protection laws in place. And the third part is market adoption. Here we are talking about both private and public adoption. Private innovation is well understood. Private players are keen to drive monetary and economic outcomes. So they are, of course, keen to adopt anything that enables them to sort of decrease cost or open up a new playground for them. But we are also talking about public innovation, wherein governments, developmental partners, NGOs, etc., can also use the same shared infrastructure to arrive at the SDGs or the other developmental outcomes that they're trying to focus on. And these are diverse and inclusive at the same time, taking into account things like digital divide, at the same time accounting for the evolvability of use cases as the world we know is changing so much every day. So again, this is something that's been reiterated every day, in all sessions many times. DPI is not about digitization in silos, and building monolithic centralized systems goes against the principles of a good DPI architecture and good DPI design. It's also not about centralization. You can't have one DPI to solve many use cases. As we keep saying, it does one thing. A DPI block does one thing, and it does that very well. Either it verifies individuals or it enables you to do seamless payment transactions. It can't be doing everything. There is this tendency to put in place super apps or systems that do everything, that consolidate all the functions in one place, but that actually goes against the principles of good DPI design, because you would never be able to scale that at a population level. And DPIs are hence inherently decentralized. They can be owned and operated by many different government departments or communities, and they work together using open standards and open protocols to achieve an outcome. Going back to the building blocks or Lego blocks example, so they are just a set of building blocks. You will take one of those building blocks and combine it with your own workflow, with your own organizational policies, business use cases, and so on, to assemble a full-fledged solution. And globally, what we've been speaking about again today are countries have built digital public infrastructure. It's not a new concept, although the name is new, but countries have been silently building digital public infrastructure that follows all these rules for the past couple of years. And some of these are foundational, which, as the name suggests, are foundational for a digital economy to thrive. First is verifiable identities that enables any person to authenticate themselves to get access to a service. Second is payments, both P2P, P2M, and also government benefits transfer, and finally data sharing that empowers any individual to use their data to get access to a service. But one thing I want to highlight on is not every ID payments and data sharing operates as a digital public infrastructure. It's about the design approach to them. So, how do you distinguish DPI from digitization? A traditional digitization approach can also look similar sometimes. It's putting in place some systems, it's opening some services to some individuals. How do you differentiate between both these? So there are 5 principles that are important to keep in mind when you are architecting a digital public infrastructure block. First is, of course, interoperability. I will not go into that. That has been talked about many times today, driven by you have to use open specifications or open standards so that others are able to reuse what you have built. Second is minimalist infrastructure. DPI is not an end-to-end solution. It's just a minimalist rail that does one thing, and it does that extremely well. And it's also not a point of contact solution. It's just the underlying infra, and people can build on top of it. Third is diverse, inclusive ecosystem innovation, again by private and public players. Any DPI block that you put into place has to enable this. And when we say diverse, inclusive innovation, it also has to account for factors like digital divide. For example, if you're putting in place a payments digital public infrastructure, it cannot be that the infrastructure works for only people like with smartphones. It has to work for people who have feature phones or who do not have phones at all. So the digital public infrastructure block has to be architected in such a way that it accounts for all the digital divide, but also is evolvable, that it supports use cases that might come up in future and technological advancements of the future. Fourth is it has to be federated and decentralized by design, with a preference for data staying where it's been collected instead of centralizing everything into a huge data warehouse and so on. Finally, security and privacy. It cannot be an afterthought. That has to be factored into the design of the DPI itself. And now here is where let's talk about a use case, because we've been talking about theory for some time now. Let's consider a hypothetical country that wants to put in place a public insurance campaign for underprivileged population. Say they want to give free medical insurance for everyone who's below some X dollars annual income. So how can that use case or that program bring together different DPI blocks for it to be able to work efficiently? So you would need digital IDs to verify people. You need to know who you're giving the benefits to. You need payment rails to actually send the money, disburse the money to either the individual or the healthcare facility we are talking about. You would need verifiable credential or some sort of a digital wallet in which the people who are eligible for this benefit can actually store their eligibility certificate that says, oh, you are eligible for this benefit, you are under X dollars per year annual income. Now we've been talking about foundational DPI on one side of it, but there is also sector-specific DPI that is put in place with the intention of accelerating outcomes in specific sectors like healthcare, education, climate action and energy transition, agriculture, and so on. For this particular program, it will use health data exchange, because you need to know what treatment did you undergo to be able to process that insurance claim. Then many functional registry, including the patient registry, the facility registry, the professional registry, to understand where was the treatment delivered, what are all the available resources in the country, and so on. And finally, to also bring all these actors together and to support the many point of contact applications and systems, you would need some sort of a claims management protocol or infra that looks extensively only at coordinating all these actors together. This is by no means exact or exhaustive. It's just to trigger your imagination on how foundational and sector-specific DPIs work together to drive a program ahead. over the course of next 3 days, we will dig deep into what are the specific health sector DPIs that are required for your country. And in the previous slide, we saw how a program uses many DPIs. Here we can see how a DPI block can be used by many programs. We are talking about a simple DPI block like a registry of healthcare professionals that can be used in a malaria eradication campaign run by the government, that can be used for telemedicine by both private players and the government. While both these use cases are in the healthcare sector itself, it can also be used by the financial sector to give those health professionals access to credit based on their employment and so on. So with this, I would maybe end my presentation. But if you were to take away just 3 points from this whole discussion, it is, first, DPI is just minimal infra that is available for anyone to build solutions on within and across sectors. Second, it's all about interoperability across systems, within DPI blocks, with DPI blocks and the end solutions who are going to be using it, and technology standards and enabling policy and market adoption are the way to really arrive at that interoperability. Third, DPI approach is necessary but not sufficient. This is not all. You would still need a lot of end user facing use cases, many systems, your own business workflows, and so on. But in absence of this DPI approach to digital transformation, you're looking at probably a much longer horizon. And having this DPI approach in place eliminates all the delays of coordination, eliminates the need to eliminate siloed systems, and brings in a combinatorial effect where sum of things are greater than, the whole is greater than the sum of things as we speak about. So over to you, Hani, and that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anusri, for this very comprehensive overview of how the digital ecosystem in general perceives DPI. Now I would like to move to Professor Satya, who will zoom in a little bit more in the India use case, because we know that India is one of the good examples of DPI. You need to press this button to next.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Anusri, for that solid technology foundation to the DPI. Start with Why is a recent book I think some of you would have read in this room by Simon Sinek, where he says that the most important question that when you embark on a new initiative or a project, the most important question is why? Why are we talking about DPI in the first instance? What difference does it make? Will it make a huge difference to the world? So in this, you can just see, I try to list here, several reasons why we should really focus on DPI. Most importantly, the SDG angle, we are far behind the targets. 2030 is not quite far away, but we are still not even half the way. And also population scale solutions, how do you achieve? Several speakers, in fact, every one of us spoke about the siloed nature of the solutions that are being developed. How do you overcome this? Then one key thing here is, the most important bullet on this would be the migration or the kind of change that is happening, transition that's happening from systems to ecosystems. And he showed it in terms of houses, different houses, etc. Very good analogy. So instead of that, you can't have something for public sector, something for private sector, something for NGO sector, and ask them to, work together. No, it doesn't work that way. When you are talking of ecosystem, you think the architecture and the building blocks that are useful for an ecosystem. That's a very important, determinant of why we should have DPI. It's not a new fashionable word. I've been at it for 30 years. So I've been seeing the transition of digital for the last 30 years, but this is more powerful than the previous concepts. Now, to make all these things, DPI nicely fits into the whole environment here. Also, there has been a reference to foundational DPIs. What kind of DPIs are we talking about? Can there be a DPI which is a magic wand for everything, every sector, every occasion, every use case? No. There's certain core operations that we do as human beings, as systems, as organizations. That's the foundational DPI. On the left, you can see there are 4 which have been recognized. Some people say it's 5, some say it is 4. But there is what is called the foundational, which means that they are bricks which can be used in constructing any kind of building. Right? They are universal. They are agnostic of a sector. You can use an ID to provide health services, to provide transportation services, to provide benefits to the poor people with the same very ID. Likewise, payments and data exchange is agnostic of a sector. If you have an exchange, you can exchange any kind of data, and so on. On the other hand, we are sitting in this 3 days conference here, not so much about the left side of this slide, but more about the right side, where we're talking of a sectoral DPI, which is related to health, which draws upon these fundamental or foundational DPIs and then builds on top of that several other bricks, which are used only for health. So UNDP, for instance, has identified after some research that these 10 should be attended to first. So I'm only trying to distinguish between foundational DPIs, which are the most important. If you are short of resources, if you are hurried in time, if I have limited resources, I would put my dollar first on the left side, because the bang for the buck will be more on this side than the sectoral. So that's the distinction I just want to make. And we are, of course, on top, on the top right, you see the health as a sectoral DPI that needs importance and relevant for this conference. Now, coming back to India, next few slides will be about India. So way back, we had conceived of this, the terminology of DPI was not yet existing, but we were in the process of doing that very same thing, though under different names. It was called India Stack, which is nothing but a kind of agglomeration of several of these foundational DPIs. So I'm giving 2 examples here. On the right, you will see one is the Aadhaar, or the universal and unique digital ID for a population of 1.3 billion. Biometric identified and used for almost several hundreds of services across the country. So that is the Aadhaar. You can see the numbers really in trillions and billions. And I had the rare privilege of being the chairman of this organization for 3 years. So that's one of the largest DPIs the world can really cite. The second one is about the payments. Every day, probably 10 to 12 payments we make in different, small or big, to a small or big person on the other side. So UPI is a bridge that really made payment, instantaneous payment, almost trivial. With the result that the poorest person, illiterate person in India can also make payments and receive payments. The street side vendors, they all have their QR code, and then they receive the payment from whoever is buying from them. So these 2 are the strongest and biggest examples that I can cite, that DPI is not merely a concept that we talk about in conferences. It has reached billions of people all over the world, and this is the example. Now, what are the building blocks? Hani mentioned about the bricks. What are those bricks? What are the foundational bricks? In terms of healthcare, if you see, these are the kind of, first I'll talk about the bricks, then I'll talk about some of the features. This is about a DPI-based ecosystem that we had designed way back in 2018 in India. It's called the National Digital Health Blueprint and a mission was created to implement that. I was the chairman of that expert group which made this. Now, these are the big foundational bricks that make up the, DPI called health DPI. First one is a unique ID, which is specific to health. You may ask me, you just showed us Aadhaar, our unique ID for all the citizens. Why are you creating one more? Here is to ring fence the sensitive data relating to health. I don't want to go into more details, but one of the foundations is that, and the registries for healthcare professionals, there is the doctors, and then health facilities like hospitals and public health centers and so on across the whole country. And then the bridge that enables the data exchange seamlessly, interoperably, based on FHIR, etc. And then the personal health records. So on this side, you'll see that this is again completely based on FHIR. In fact, as mentioned in the previous presentation by Carl and his colleague, so this is based on FHIR standard, adopted. Not all were 45 resources, but only 26 resources were prioritized. And then around that, 42 more profiles have been built to make up, the requirements for FHIR. See, these are some of the numbers which are really mind-boggling for any country. So I'm really proud standing here to present these numbers 5 years after the report was made by us. It's really real life benefits. So 692 million unique health IDs issued in the country. 456 million records have been added by these people. And 352,000 facilities and 527,000 doctors have registered themselves. So the registries are some of the foundational bricks that we have been discussing earlier. So this is some big numbers. And this is a very straightforward case. What is in it for me? Can you please give me an example of how it helps a common man, a poor man, etc. This is a common scene that whenever we go to the public facilities and public health facilities especially, there's a lot of crowding. The OP is really like the most crowded place, the most uncomfortable place, where people who are already suffering from some disease or the other have to stand in line and suffer. So this is a DPI, how it can help is a practical example. From queue to QR, how can you abolish those queues? Unfortunately, we are victims of queues even for tea and coffee, very often on the lighter side. But can you really do something about it? So from queue to QR, or it's also called scan and share. That is the, where you don't have to physically stand in the queue, but you have a token with which you can go to wherever you are. So you can see at the bottom I have given the reference. You can explore more about this. So just as an example of how you can make a difference with a DPI to the common man. Millions of people, as you see the numbers. This is, of course, a critical success factors, I would say. The biggest, if you forget everything else, as Anushree said, technology is only one part of it. The other parts are the governance, capacity building, leadership. If you have the top leadership commitment, then things happen very nicely. So I think, as I said, it's in a digital public infrastructure. Digital is important, it's necessary, but not sufficient, as she said. The other things are also required to complement the thing. And one of the key things here is the capacity. How many people can really read and write DPI, so to say. So for that purpose, we have created recently, about 6 months, less than 6 months back, this institution called the DPI Academy, for which I'm the chairperson of this organization. More details you can scan and access through the link there. But the key thing here is, how do you create the capacity to design, develop, and implement local capacities in various countries? Starting with India, our idea is to promote such centers and collaborate with such centers in Africa, Latin America, and Global South in general. So this is one attempt we are making as a contribution to push the DPI agenda forward as fast as we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Satya. And I think we're going to remember this from Q to QR. That's very, very interesting. Okay, so last but not least, I'm going to invite Dr. Ramkumar to give, unfortunately, 6 minutes maximum brief about. Yeah, yes, kind of.
Okay.
Really try
Which
to,
one is the forward?
This one. Try to stick to 6 minutes.
Okay, I'm Ram Kumar, Chief Architect of the GovStack. What you see in GovStack, Hani mentioned a bit in the morning. We actually began from analyzing the health system and to try to identify common building blocks that would be relevant to healthcare almost 10 years ago. And we looked at the clinical aspects, the supply chain, the governance, the human capacity building, put everything together from a government point of view, and you will find probably 25 to 30 building blocks. When we discovered these building blocks, that we actually sampled use cases from several countries, and we looked at the common minimum functionalities that we should bring together. So when we brought it together, we also started citing that there are similar requirements in other sectors, and then started sampling other verticals like agriculture, like education, and so on. So what came out of this study has led to GovStack, basically. What came out of this study was an important pointer that about 70 to 75% of that were common building blocks. So now what you see is we learned our lessons from the study of healthcare extensively, but then we could apply that to several other ministries. So we then expanded the scope to basically cover the entire governance, and today GovStack is actually approaching it from a whole of government approach to be able to recast different types of services as to how to build it using common minimum building blocks. So all the good things that you're hearing since morning, we tried to do that by inviting experts from various countries, specialized in various domains. And first thing that we tried to do was to put together a set of specifications that we are not inventing for the first time, but to borrow the best practices, standards, and experiences that people have gained from very, very different, diverse type of demographies. Countries which are having problems with telecom, countries which are very advanced and they have no such issues, different types of governance, different types of challenges. So brought together and identified certain specific characteristics and functional requirements of these building blocks. And that's what you will find in the Gov specs. We have put together is a list of specifications. The work is still going on, and we have listed a few specifications as of now. And then the second thing that we did was to take those specifications to try and test ourselves whether this really meets the common minimum requirements. So you will find something called GovTest within the GovStack website, if you see, where we have developed certain specific test cases, because these specifications were written in a way that somebody could build it out of any software platform. And as long as it is compliant to those specifications and the APIs that have been defined there, they will become interoperable and reusable. The GovTest is basically a set of, you will find there a set of tests. You also find a set of test environments for actualizing and testing your own cases based on your requirements in your governments. And then we saw how do you take this to the field from the kitchen. And there you require a lot of learning material and a lot of tools for learning, make it simple and easy to pick up this thing and adopt it into their realms. So GovLearn is another pillar where we have a lot of learning resources and tools, We are also doing a lot of capacity building workshops in different countries. And I'm just coming in here from 2 such events just before this in Cambodia and Eswatini. So as we are doing this, we also started citing and partnering with the ecosystem of private and public sector, industries, institutions which have already got some components. We are also discovering some components are already available with some of the countries that we are engaging with, which can be refactored into the building blocks. So the Gov market is a marketplace that we have set up where people can come in with their whatever assets they have. If they are compliant to these specifications and they pass those compliance tests, they could be in the marketplace. So people get to know that these components are already available. So while we are doing this, we are ourselves as GovStack product neutral, technology neutral, and vendor neutral. So we have just been kind of trying to put together these specifications in a way that this becomes an easy path for migration from as-is to to-be scenarios in various countries. So, okay, so and then we have engagements going on in all these 3, 4 frameworks here. In terms of, we are engaging with countries in kind of guidance and mentorship to transform their citizen-centric digital services. They have certain as-is use cases and services right now, and many of them have to understand when it becomes digital, what are all the optimizations they can actually bring in. So as we discussed earlier, we are looking at dependencies on 4 fronts: policy, process, provisioning, and practice. So you need certain policy changes, like we talked about data protection in the morning, to actualize this adoption of digital transformation. We require, there can be significant process improvements, simplification of the processes by going to this transformation. Likewise, when you implement, there is a lot of assumption right now that these components will simply work with each other. To actualize that interoperability, there are certain provisionings that have to be done. And in practice, if your staff have to adopt, if your community and users, the citizens have to adopt to this new digital system, there's got to be a lot of awareness building and training and campaigning. And so these 4 are what you see here. We do the citizen trainings on citizen-centric digital service. And then we help the governments to actually go through the prototyping exercise in a simplistic way that they can do it before putting something on scale. We have engaged in the ecosystem to have a lot of DPI building blocks built and stacked so people can explore and add new building blocks to this environment. And as I said, when you go down, tops down, from the governance point of view to the business analyst layer, where you are building processes for several sectors, and then you go to the technology layer and the skill building layer in the user community, those dependencies are also published in our PIARA, which is basically Public Administration Enterprise Reference Architecture, which has chapters that deals with different types of audience. You have policymakers, you have sectorial business analysts, then you have technical layer, and then you have the final adopters who are using the system. So you will find that a number of resources as listed here. You would see that there are specifications that you see in these architectural specifications, building block specifications. And now you may very well find that if we take this and map, you will find that in the interoperability specifications, you may find that the fire and the adaptation from non-fire compatible to fire compatible to older versions of HL7 to fire, you will find there are adapters that will be required. And that's where the gaps can be filled in. We are not writing fire. We are saying how to adopt fire so that you can achieve interoperability in a certain sector. So we have these 4 layers defined. Pretty much we have seen these layers in the morning in other sessions. So what we have done is very, very similar in terms of identifying the foundational building blocks at the bottom. And then on top of it, there could be specific sectorial applications that are built. And there is a lot of cross-sector migration of data between health and legal, for example, between health and insurance sector, for example. And so many such kind of cross-sectional interoperability, assuming that there should be security, safety, privacy, which is guaranteed when those kind of interactions happen, is in the mediation middleware. We call it the information mediation layer. And the final one is on the top, which is assuming these infrastructure, the DPI works interoperably and securely, you can then start casting various services in various sectors seamlessly without worrying about which ministry has to share this data with me, because that's all taken care at the bottom layers. So this is in summary, the stack of the Go stack. So this is what you see as if you go to the website, you will find a lot more resources. I hope I have done a good job in 6 minutes. And my chairman will allow me to conclude the session.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I mean, there are a lot of content to be squeezed in 45 minutes. Actually, we took 51 minutes. Sorry, Garrett. But anyway, thank you very much for all the speakers. And I think they really deserve a last round of applause. Thank you very much.